Hello, everyone. This is Marila from Marcus Evans. Thank you all for joining today's webinar, Transforming Internal Communications, Leveraging Technology and AI for Successful Messaging Delivery and Exchange Employee Engagement, brought to you in partnership with ContactMonkey. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. As you can see at the bottom of your screen, are multiple application widgets that you can use. You can either click on any of them during the webinar or just click the help widget that will assist you further. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them to the Q&A widget. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. However, if we run out of time, we'll make sure to answer to you via email. A copy of today's materials and other URLs are located in the resource list. You are free to click on bookmark any links that you might find useful. At this point, I will briefly introduce our moderator today, Grace McClure, Head of Content at ContactMonkey. Grace, you can take the stand.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. We so appreciate you spending perhaps your lunch hour or another hour with us. So welcome to everybody on the line. I think we have a very exciting panel discussion to really dive in a little bit deeper about how to transform internal comms by leveraging new technology. So I'll firstly introduce myself, and then I'll turn it over to each of our panelists to intro who they are, and then I'll jump into a little bit about ContactMonkey, and then we're going to roll off with the questions. So firstly, I'm Grace McClure, Head of Content at ContactMonkey. It is a mouthful, but basically my role is to research and develop all types of content, whether it be long-form surveys and guides to blogs and infographics about internal communications. So while I'm not an internal communicator by trade, I've spent a lot of time listening to communicators, engaging with them, and trying to really answer questions and problems and understand the space. So that's who I am, and I would love to welcome our actual communicators, both Mandy and Thomas. So Mandy, why don't you say hello and a little bit about who you are first, and then pass it to Thomas.
Sure. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Mandy Mooney. I am the Director of Internal Communications. I work at a company called Prologis. So we always joke Prologis is probably the biggest company you've never heard of. We are a major player in the logistics real estate space. We have about 5,600 buildings globally. And Prologis we have about 2,500 employees and growing every day in 19 countries. So I have the privilege of making sure everybody knows what's going on. But I didn't grow up in real estate. I always say that I grew up at Gap. So I worked at the retail giant for about the better part of a decade before jumping over to tech, as one does in the Bay Area. And my background is both in communications and marketing. So I come with a little bit of both from that perspective. I am obsessed with using data to drive decision-making. And like many of you, I am following the AI phenomenon very closely. So I'm very excited to have this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mandy. Excited to have such a well-versed internal communicator on the panel. So thank you. And Thomas, would love to intro you to all of our audience here.
Yeah, such a pleasure to be in community, both with you, Mandy and Grace, and for all of those out there virtually. My name is Thomas Kilgore. I have the distinct pleasure of serving as Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as Internal Communications for RADIAL North America. Our parent company, bpost Group, is based out of Belgium, which globally has approximately 30,000 employees. I will say that with RADIAL North America, we have approximately 5,000 employees, although during peak season, that could easily fluctuate with our seasonal workforce. So really excited to be in community with you all. I will say that a vast majority of my background is in luxury retail. So I've had the honor of serving brands such as Christian Dior, Neiman Marcus Group, Saks Fifth Avenue, and Bloomingdale's, just to name a few. And so it will be some interesting dialogue. I agree. I think communications has vastly changed, even in the past 10 years. And so rather than us being reactive, I really look forward to having a conversation of how we can be proactive.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. I think you touched on already some really good points, and I know a lot is more to come in our questions. I hope Christian Dior gave you some clothes. That's all I will say there. But yeah, really amazing companies that you have both worked with. I will just jump in quickly before we enter our panel discussion just about ContactMonkey. So we have sponsored today's session. ContactMonkey is an internal communication email solution that works directly within your company's Outlook or Gmail. So that's a seamless integration. There's no clunky add-ons required or new tech to bring into your organization that would require hefty IT approvals, so it is quite seamless. Our platform is specifically designed for internal communications, aiming to send better, more engaging emails to employees. So we help you create, engage, send, and track better internal comms that all aim to really engage your employees, whether it be a dispersed or in-house workforce. So that's who we are. And without further ado, I would love to jump in to our first question. So the first question is, how do you measure internal communications at your company, and what does success look like? As a Coles note, as the head of content at ContactMonkey, we actually do 2 large annual surveys, all targeting internal communicators. This year, we actually had a record number of responses for both our global state of internal communication survey and internal benchmark report. So both offer a lot of data and insights, which I will pepper throughout where it fits, and really give us so much insight into the IC challenges, how success is measured, tech adoption, et cetera. So would love to hear from you both on this question in particular, and just how you really measure what success looks like in improving employee engagement. So without further ado, Mandy, how do you measure internal communications at your company, and what does success look like? I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, this is really important to my team. And when I first got to Prologis, we didn't do this. We didn't measure communications. And I think, philosophically, it's so important to understand, why are we doing all this work to begin with? And you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And so methodically, I think the approach that we take is always starting with the objectives. And I think at any company, you want to start there. Like, what are you actually trying to achieve? Because I don't think it'll look the same at ContactMonkey as it does at Prologis. So when you think about employees, are you trying to create culture? Are you trying to build pride in the brand? Are there trust issues that you're trying to work through and create more transparency? Maybe it's all of the above. But by starting with the objectives, starting with what are you trying to achieve, it's much more easy, and I think more common sense to create strategies from there. So we start with objectives. Next, we go to what are the right strategies to meet those objectives. And then from there, you roll on to the tactics. And I know this sounds sort of rudimentary for anybody who's done this sort of strategic work before, but it's really important to always go back to, I think, that method of starting with objectives. You move to the strategy, the how, and then what channels, what tools are you going to pull on to deliver on those objectives? I think this is especially important in the conversation around technology and AI, because there are a lot of shiny objects that are being thrown at us, communicators, in terms of tools and technology. But if you root it, if you ground it in what you're actually trying to achieve, then I think it's much easier to see, well, what tools do I need to meet those objectives, to meet those strategies? And then you decide on the metrics. So your question was, at our company, how do we do that? Well, I'm looking at 3 things. I'm looking at the intranet that we use. This is our storytelling. And my team will tell you, I do not believe in vanity metrics. So I try to always look at that data and see, initially we were looking at views, the number of people who were looking at stories. But as our company grows and as our employee base grows, it looked really good, but it didn't take into account the changing population. So we do percentage of views based on the employee population for the intranet stories. The second one is events. I look at approval ratings. So after each event, we send out a survey, and it used to be 5 to 10% of people would take those surveys. Now we're trying some different technology with poll functionality with Zoom, and we're seeing more like 25 to 30% of people who attend events telling us, was this a good use of your time? So approval ratings for events is the second one. And then when we look at emails, which, that's a big part of our jobs. Love it or hate it, email is here and here to stay for the foreseeable future. And so we look at email open rates and we look at click-through rates, because that information can be really interesting when you think about, was this a good use of their time? Did they even bother looking at it? And once they did, what were they clicking on? What did they find most interesting? So that's a little bit of insight into how we measure internal communications and what success looks like for us at Prologis.
Yeah, I think that that's really great. You set the stage on what's to come and when we get into the more tactical part of the conversation. But I think that all very valid, that the strategy needs to come before the plan, and the execution always measure, measure, measure. And Thomas, what about you?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate what Mandy is saying. And quite similarly, we use a very similar approach when it comes to objective setting for sure. Equally important, I think it's important to underscore that when we look at it, we're also looking at quantitative analysis and we're looking at qualitative and really kind of dissecting both. So I would say from like a quantitative standpoint, echoing the same sentiments as Mandy with emails, even our video metrics, what is the open rate, what's our click-through rate, etc. With the intranet page, how many page views do we have, the frequency of visits, how much time is actually spent on the page. I would also say, even with the town halls that we host, how many attendees do we have? Has it actually gone up and down per quarter? What are the likes in the actual chat feature, the responses, the amount of comments, etc. And something very new and recent that we've introduced are QR codes. So as we are trying to do internal campaigns, how many people are actually scanning those QR codes? What is the engagement geographically? Those are some things quantitatively that we look at. But I think oftentimes what is quite ignored, or maybe not necessarily get as much weight, is that qualitative data that is really rich in insight. So employee surveys especially, and from the surveys, being able to identify any key themes that we're hearing, and then hosting follow-up focus groups, seeing if there's any kind of thematic text analysis from those focus groups, as well as Q&A sessions with our town halls. I will say that in real time, when employees submit their questions, often we can't get to all of them. So one of the best practices that we do is we ensure that we follow up with the questions that were unanswered and find the key stakeholders within the organization to provide answers. Lastly, I would say conducting communication audits are really critical and really give some really great qualitative insights there. So I know that was a mouthful, but I do think it's important to underscore the difference between quantitative data as well as qualitative, and really emphasizing the qualitative piece for sure.
Right. Yeah, very valid. And I think both important pieces, qualitative and quantitative. I think you touched on an important part about pulling out the themes of the communication and the responses you're hearing from your employees and how engaged they are, and then building strategy and tactics from there. But pulling out the themes is really vital too. So Mandy, did you have anything to add before we move on to our next question?
Thomas brought something up for me that I didn't remember I wanted to share, but now I do. And that's, adding to the point around qualitative information and how important it is. We always read every comment, but one of the ways in which we've been using AI is we have this proprietary, we call it Prologis GPT. It's our internal AI tool that we use right now. And what we started doing is copying and pasting all of the survey data, all of the survey comments, and pulling the key themes, because with the right prompt, it saves you endless time from, of course, you still want to read them all, but in terms of getting a summary or, the 5 key themes, with the right prompt, you can get it within a matter of seconds, as opposed to maybe hours that you would have spent pulling it. And it's without bias, because as all of us communicators know, we put our hearts and our souls into these events. And so you kind of see what you want to see sometimes when you're pulling those summaries, and it takes away any kind of bias. So it's one way that I think, adding to the point around the importance of qualitative, that you can more quickly and more strategically get those themes.
Love
One
that.
thing too that I want to add, Grace, if you don't mind, is that the component around measuring success, I think, is really critical. And oftentimes, what I find, and at least it's something that I quite wrestle with, even within my organization, is making sure that we establish a baseline. I think all too often we're very quick to kind of create an arbitrary number of what the goal is when we're doing the objective setting piece, but really being able to incrementally see change over a few months to see, okay, how is the needle moving? That then we now have an actual, I think, a go forward strategy of how to proceed. And I will say, as a best practice for us, and I think it's also important to preface that I think it varies from industry to industry, but we like to see at least within 6 months, like a 10% to 15% increase in some of those changes with the open to click rate, et cetera. But it varies from, again, organization to organization.
Yeah, I love that. I think this is the perfect segue to our second question, where we're already dialing in a little bit more on measurements and metrics, with you both touched on quite heavily in your response to question one. So how do you identify which internal comms metrics to measure, and how do you set targets and monitor progress or goal hitting? Thomas, why don't you go first on this one?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this question. I think it's one that's very important to really unpack. So kind of echoing back what Mandy had mentioned earlier around this goal setting piece, really making sure that you're aligned with organizational goals. And so I think it's really critical to see what are some of the opportunities within your organization and what are you trying to actually indeed communicate. One of the things that we are noticing is that there's a very huge opportunity when it comes to bridging the knowledge gap of financial literacy. So oftentimes we may give our financial performance results, but we need to dial it back. Do people actually understand what is EBIT? What is the operational definition of revenue? What does a VCM rate mean? And so there's probably a communication of like just knowledge sharing before we can actually get into the meat of it all. So I think that's really critical. It could be anything from cybersecurity, compliance, et cetera, but really looking at what those organizational goals are, I think is really, really important. I also want to emphasize that, and I'm going back to like my graduate school days, and I had one professor that told me there are 4 different types of communication, right? So I think as organizations, we do a good job with downward communication. So where corporate is speaking down to employees, but oftentimes we forget, how do we create channels of upward communication? How are we creating channels of lateral communication, where essentially peers are actually speaking with each other? So within my industry, we're an e-logistics company that really is a service provider for many clients. So anytime you order something online, we're the organization that ships the goods to you. And so what's interesting in all of this is if we have a site director at one location and they want to speak to another site director, what communication channels are we creating there laterally? But equally important, vertical communication. So no matter where you sit within the organization, whether if you're at the C-suite, whether if you're a director, you're a manager or a frontline worker, how are we creating vertical communication? And so really looking at that, I think it's important. That's how you kind of then start to measure some of the metrics, right? What are we trying to achieve within each of those with satisfaction rates, pulse surveys, et cetera?
Yeah, Thomas, I had a double circle around downward communication versus lateral and vertical. And I thought, yeah, very poignant, such a thoughtful answer. And absolutely, how are we really speaking to and getting feedback from employees in a way that is two-way? It's not just from the top down, and that is reflected in eNPS or employee turnover, other metrics that are more measurable, but absolutely. Mandy, did you want to add something to this question? I'm sure you do.
I think Thomas nailed it. I shared a little bit earlier about our specific metrics around the intranet, events, emails. I think he makes some great points around town halls and attendance, and are people even showing up? Are they demonstrating with their time that it was worthwhile to them? The one thing I will add is that in terms of not setting targets, but how you monitor progress, which I know is the second part of your question, I am adamant about doing this on at least a quarterly basis and holding ourselves accountable to stopping and taking the time to review the metrics, as opposed to just, it's so easy with the nature of our jobs to keep going, to keep plugging along. There's always more to do, but to pause and really take stock of, how did that quarter go? How did that quarter go compared to the previous quarter, compared to the one from a year ago? I think now we have the luxury of year-over-year reporting, which we didn't have when I first got there. So it is such a gift to be able to identify trends based on different things happening in different years. What is the sentiment? What's happening culturally? What's happening in our world that might be impacting communications? And it gives you some really interesting macro insights. So for me, the one thing I wanted to add was around consistent and holding yourself accountable to tracking the progress, whether it be on a monthly, quarterly, maybe it's biannual basis.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that. Oh, sorry.
No, of course, Thomas, take it away.
No, I was just going to say, what I appreciate what Mandy is saying is that when we're looking at that too, extending, and no pun intended, but giving ourselves grace, right? I think it's really important that even if we don't hit the targets or the metrics, there's probably a story there to kind of unpack, and really being able to kind of see what is like the through line. But yeah, I think oftentimes as communicators and as working professionals, sometimes we don't extend ourselves grace, and oftentimes the onus is solely on us. But that's not the case. There could be a lot of other external factors impacting measurement. And so, yeah, that's what I want to offer.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point, that the story, whether it's good or bad, is pertinent information for building out next steps or what your internal comms strategy should look like. So just grabbing, you both touched on it, just the baseline or benchmark metrics, and to be able to extrapolate it over time and have a large data swath is so valuable, and something that's widely available to all communicators now. And I think this leads us to our technology portion. So thankfully, because we've had such great technological development, so many solutions now entering the marketplace, that we really are able to measure employee engagement, retention, satisfaction, like we never were able to do before, and which presents us with so much extra information for building a better organization. So my question here to you both is, how do you utilize technology to deploy effective communication strategies? And then part two is for all of our listeners, I'm sure they're quite curious, what tools are in your suite? So if we open the hood, what's in there? What is helping to drive all of the strategies that we've just talked about? So why don't I start with you, Mandy? Again, how do you utilize tech, and what tools do you love?
Grace, I've been waiting for this question. This is my favorite question of the whole thing. I think this is the $1 million question, right? So we use different technologies for different reasons. I don't think there's like a one-stop shop, like silver bullet, it's the right thing for everybody. But for us, it's a combination of, I always tell my team, like, we're always in dating mode. Like, we're not going to be married to any one specific technology because they're changing, they're evolving so quickly. We really need to dedicate time and resources to staying on top of what's out there. But for us, our suite looks like, we're a Microsoft company, so you love it or hate it, like, sometimes you're stuck with what you've got. And so we've got the Outlook, we've got Teams, and so SharePoint is what we use in the Microsoft suite for our intranet. So it's great, it does the job, pros and cons to lots of different platforms, but that's what we have at our company when it comes to storytelling and that sort of source of truth, the repository for company information. I am a big believer in an editorial calendar. Back in the day, we would like have a whiteboard and we'd write it all out. Technology has evolved. We now use Trello. I grew up an Asana girl, so there are different ways of doing things. Now we have Trello. What I like about it is it does allow you to be really flexible in the ever-evolving world of communications and changing dates and details. For videos, we use Wistia. For survey development, we use Qualtrics that I mentioned earlier. Zoom has a really great polling function. My latest obsession is something that was discovered to me, I think like, my internet knew what cookies I was following, or, followed me and knew that I might like this. It was advertised to me, Easy Movie, which is a very cool, exactly what it sounds like, software for making movies, making videos in an easy way, whether it's a tutorial or an event recap video. It's like, it is so cool. Everybody should check it out. They're not paying me to say that. And then we recently signed on for a Canva Pro account because Canva's fabulous. And we use that for our image development. They're doing some really cool things with AI too. And then of course we have an email platform. So we need something like that to be able to track metrics like open rates, and also to make all of our email communication look pretty. So that's a little bit about the tools in our suite and how we use technology to deploy some of those objectives that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, so interesting. I love hearing about everyone's tools. There's so many fabulous ones out there. And yeah, the number you touched on, it sounds high, but it's what every internal communicator is mostly working with, hopefully, is all these great solutions. Thomas, how do you utilize technology at your company, and what tools are in your suite?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Mandy, I want to thank you for that. I've taken copious notes here. I'm like, oh, wow, Wistia? Okay, Easy Movie? Okay, done. So I was definitely researching, and that's what this is all about, right? Knowledge sharing. So I appreciate that. I will preface by saying we are certainly at our infancy stage when it comes to technology, but some of the things quite very similarly to Mandy here, we have Microsoft Teams as well. So we use Outlook Suite. Our RADIAL Strong newsletter is something that we use quite extensively, and in it we're now starting to incorporate videos. We've noticed that we've had higher engagement when we actually have customized videos from key leaders within the organization. We're also very intentional with looking at our surveys and seeing what do employees actually want to hear about, and then from that strategically identifying key leaders to serve as spokespeople within our newsletter and giving updates regularly. We do use Teams quite often for town hall meetings. And so we're trying to get even more innovative with just like fun surveys throughout, whiteboard activities, et cetera, to really make it much more engaging, especially with our remote workforce. I alluded to this earlier with the QR codes. We use something called QR Planet, and it's a really great optimization tool that really, especially within our service delivery sites, if we have a poster or some kind of call to action on the bulletin boards, on our digital displays, we have table tents in our break rooms and lunch rooms, using that QR code as a way for people to then go ahead, grab their phone, scan it, and give us information in real time. What's very cool about the app is that it geographically lets us know who's scanning from where. So I'm able to see geographically, okay, these particular sites, we have very high employee engagement versus these not so much. So maybe let me go to these sites to see what are some of their best practices. But I also like it too because, and you'll have to forgive me, I am an Android user. So many people make fun of me for it. And I think it's the rebel in me. I mean, I do have an iPhone that's work phone, so I have iPhone and my Android. But what's cool with the QR Planet is that you can see what devices people are using, and it'll give you the breakdown of if it's an iPhone or an Android. And what's really rich about that information as we build out our communication strategy is then being intentional when we're looking at AI platforms. Are they compatible with a Samsung? Are they compatible with iPhone, et cetera? So the last thing I would say, we use something called WorkStep, which is a text messaging SMS platform. We are piloting this at 6 of our locations. It's the hugest gap that we have with our frontline workers, and we're trying to bridge the gap to those who are not receiving email communication now. And so the goal is for us to be able to offer push notifications as well as any kind of company updates.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. I think that with all the tools that we're now leveraging, there is it's almost an embarrassment of riches in terms of the data collection and analytics that we have available to us to aid with decision making. So if we didn't have anything to add, I'll jump to our next question, which I think helps build this out a little bit more. Which is, so now we have all this data, we have engagement reporting, we have click maps, we have the QR codes that are reporting various information, geographies, whatever it may be that all these great tools are offering. But it's how do we then leverage all this collected data, maybe it is from internal surveys or email analytics, to better reach our employees and actually serve the larger strategic goals of our organizations. So I know that that's a mouthful. It's a big question to unpack, but we've got the time to do it. So please, Thomas, if you want to touch on that first.
Yeah, it's such a really important question. And I would start by saying that I think it's really important to prioritize what are the competing priorities. So once we've really looked through all of the data and sift through what are the key themes that we're finding. And I think all too often we try to tackle all of the issues and problems at once, rather than honing in on the 2 to 3 key areas that are going to yield the strongest ROI. And so I think it's really important to identify and to also get alignment with key stakeholders. These are our top competing priorities, and this is where we're going to harness the most of our attention based on we feel as if it's going to have the highest impact. I also think it's important to underscore that slow and steady wins the race. And an analogy that I use, I don't have a green thumb at all. I'm very horrible when it comes to plants, but I love them so much. And I do have an aversion to fake plants. So I love nothing but real plants. I digress. When you are repotting soil, and say, for instance, you have to repot one plant somewhere else, oftentimes, you're dealing with fertilizing the soil. Sometimes there's excessive water. Sometimes it's too much direct sunlight. There's all these different variables that are impacting the growth of the plant. And I consider a communication strategy like the plant. You can't have too many variables changing all at once. Really showing incremental change over time, I think, is really critical when using the data that's collected. Because I've seen it time and time again where leaders want to make really huge footprint with like all of the things rather than just zoning in on the 3. And so I would say also making sure that the messages that you're trying to share, that you're not overwhelming the audience with too many competing messages. So what are 2 to 3 strong messages that you're trying to deliver? I will share with you in full transparency, in one of our most recent surveys, employees said that they want to know more about our financial performance and like what we're doing in order to safeguard our future. They want to know what are some of the technology advancements that we're making in order to be really competitive in the market. And they want to know like what are some of the new exciting clients that are coming down the pipeline for us. That's what they want to hear about. So as we're building out content, we have to be intentional that we're focusing on those 3 areas. And so again, that'll vary from company to company, but I do encourage everyone to really look at what are the key themes that are here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Thomas, so many great points. I had light bulbs going off throughout, especially on the fake plant part. I couldn't agree more. I too have an aversion to fake plants. Fake anything, fake metrics, fake vanity metrics. So I couldn't agree more. And Mandy, how about you? How do you utilize the data you're collecting from your various tools and software and internal comms efforts? And how are you seeing them serve larger goals?
I have to digress. I saw this hilarious meme this morning that said, "You're not bad at gardening. The plants need to stop giving up so easily." And I was like, yes, it's not my fault. It's the plants. They're just quitters. But yes, I am nodding with everything Thomas is saying, especially the part emphasizing you can't do everything all at once. And so focusing on the 1 or 2 big things that are either showing up the most as one of the themes and obviously the most important, or the things that are going to make the biggest and most impactful shifts. And I can share, for the first time at the end of last year, we launched an internal global survey just dedicated to internal communications, which we'd never done before. And so it was fascinating to see, first of all, how many people participated. We had 30% of people volunteer themselves, their time and their information and their energy to telling us what they think about internal communications, which was such a gift. And so we got really great, juicy insights on what people really think, what improvements can be made, and what they care about. So like part one is just listening, just giving people an opportunity to share their feedback, giving them a platform to do it, and then really listening to what they had to say. And I think the two big themes that came out of that we could both impact and people were telling us were most important to them was, one, emails are too long. It's too long. We don't have time. Don't send us something with 5 paragraphs. Give us 1 paragraph and 3 bullets. And so using things like smart brevity to really rethink and also re-educate leaders and employees on what people are paying attention to and how to get their attention in a way that's most effective. That's been huge. And just simply shortening the copy, not revolutionary, but very important, especially when we're being pulled in so many different directions. So that was one. And then the second insight that really stood out, excuse me, was around delivering information in your time zone, which again, this is not revolutionary, but as somebody who's sitting in the US, sending out communications in a US time zone, that doesn't feel great if you're sitting in Asia or if you're just ending your workday in Europe. And so then taking that insight and saying, okay, well, when I am auditioning new email platforms, that is really important. I need to find one that's going to better serve our employee base and our larger goals by having this functionality to be able to send emails in people's dedicated time zones. So those are a couple ways that we're both listening to employees and then trying to do something about it.
Yeah, Mandy, you touched on so many great points there, especially for myself from ContactMonkey, an email platform where we've seen this time and time again with clients where they simply were using Outlook and didn't have a plugin or an integration that revealed this type of data. So they were sending long form emails and not getting the engagement that they expected. No one was RSVPing to events and they just had no real understanding that it was way too long. And they could see in the scroll, people are only making it 20% down your email. So yes, send separate, maybe 4 emails a month rather than one gargantuan text heavy newsletter. So totally. Thomas, did you have anything you wanted to cap with, or should we move on to our AI portion of our discussion?
No, the only thing I will say, I just took a note again, Mandy, delivering information at each respective time zone. I mean, as a DEI practitioner as well, like that's such a light bulb moment of being inclusive. We do have offices in India. And so I just had like a very huge aha moment of really making sure to be intentional in that way. I love that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, Thomas, and even preferred languages. So we can communicate in the preferred language of global employees or even employees who are in the US or in Canada that maybe their preferred language isn't English. So that is something that also we take into account when we're sending emails and trying to optimize our clients' emails. All right, on to the next. I think this is such a hot topic. I don't know when AI will stop being the hot topic, but in our global survey, we asked several questions about AI and how much our clients are integrating it or how much internal communicators are starting to bring it in. So I'm so glad to have each of you here to talk from your own experience at your large, wonderful organizations to hear how you're leveraging. So the question is, how do you foresee AI helping to boost employee engagement? Mandy, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I want to preface this by saying we don't know yet. This is like everyday things are changing. We're learning, we're following. I think those of us who are coming at it with a curious mindset, we're interested, we're probably going to be the winners, and the people who are afraid of it and running away from it are not. There are 2 ways that I foresee AI, as far as I can tell, changing employee engagement. I think it's going to be personalization, and I think it's going to be collaboration. So what I'm seeing, from what I can tell with my, looking glass, is the content that we create is going to be made more engaging and more like hyper personalized. These hyper personalized experience is what AI is going to give us. We're going to be able to tailor experiences for an employee based on what is their role, what's their location. We talked about language preferences. I went to a conference in February with the conference board where there was this mind-blowing presentation where they showed a video of somebody speaking in English, and then through AI, suddenly they were speaking in French, and then they were saying the same thing in Japanese. And I mean, there's a lot we need to understand, but the potential of that inclusive experience, that personalized experience, is very exciting to me. So personalization is huge. And then I mentioned collaboration. I think on the collaboration front, there are so many annoying things we have to do every day, like scheduling group calls and looking at people's calendars and writing lengthy email recaps. And I think AI, in terms of collaboration, is going to really enhance the way that we work together collectively by minimizing all those annoying tasks that we have to do. So those are just a couple ways I think that AI is going to boost employee engagement. And it already is. I mean, those of us who are using Zoom, I think it's Zoom Companion, AI Companion right now, even that alone has been huge for me. If I've got back-to-back meetings and I can go back to my notes from the Zoom AI Companion, that saves me a lot of brain space that I wouldn't have had otherwise in between my meetings. It makes it a lot easier for me to go home to my family at the end of the day and really be like physically there, which then has an impact on my well-being. So you can see how the personalization and the collaboration are already, but especially in the future, going to have a huge impact, I think, on all of our lives.
Yeah, great answer. I love the personalization is something that I myself wrote down. I think that that's hugely important. So glad you touched on that. And just the positive side of AI and what it can really unlock for us, I think, is an important perspective too, rather than, the fear or whatever it may be. So thank you. And Thomas, what do you think about AI boosting employee engagement?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And Mandy, I think you make such a very good point around, I think sometimes people have an aversion to it, and either you're going to lean in and embrace or not. And if you don't, you are going to be left behind. And I mean, to be very frank with you, I have Alexa in my home, and I don't know, for a moment, I brought her out of my home because I just felt like she was listening way too much. I remember talking about Niagara Falls just very randomly, and then all of a sudden in my feed, I'm starting to see, come visit Niagara Falls. And I'm like, wait a minute, I have not even looked at my web browser at all about this. I had casually just said it, and then all of a sudden it's, so again, I understand people's trepidation around really leaning into it. I will say for me, I see three things in particular. Before I go into those three things, I do something I want to tag on to what Mandy was saying, the language piece. And again, as a DEI practitioner who also oversees internal communications, it's interesting, in our Indiana locations, we have a very rich population who speaks French Creole. In our Kentucky locations, as well as in California, there's a very rich Spanish-speaking population. And so really curtailing the information in a way that's digestible for that group is automatically, I think, going to really enhance employee engagement. So I appreciate that point, and I do think it's something that we need to be much more cognizant of, especially as we start to grow our organizations globally. But the 3 points that I have, one is that I think it's going to help us work smarter and not harder. And I think Mandy alluded to this before, where there's a very quick turnaround time where we're able to create punchy, digestible content with precision, and we're efficient with it. And I think all too often, especially again, through a lens of DEI, we have to be intentional with looking at different generations. So someone who's a baby boomer born between 1945 and 1963, there's a lot of empirical evidence that shows that they're on Facebook a lot. If you're a Gen Xer born between 1964 and 1979, There's a lot of research that shows Facebook, but also YouTube. If you're a millennial born between 1980 and 1995, 96, there's some debate there. Huge on Instagram, right? And if you're Gen Z, like 1996, 97 to 2012, everyone's on TikTok. And so really segmenting your audiences in a way, and then using AI tools within those different segmentations, I think is really critical. And I think we really miss the mark if we try to use a one-size-fits-all approach. Oh, the second, promoting upward feedback. So really making sure that we're creating channels for employees to actually speak up to our leaders. One thing that we're implementing, and I think all too often we forget, communication, we gotta be mindful of what are the different touch points. So we have what's called our managing committee tour. So all of our C-suite, they travel across all of our sites annually, and we do these kind of in-person town halls. But it's more so an opportunity for employees to speak up to our C-suite and actually give very invaluable insights of what are some of their pain points and where they think we need to really look at some of our blind spots. The third one, I think how it's going to change, providing employees the opportunity to speak with each other. And so, again, that kind of goes back to that whole lateral and vertical communication, where there's now this whole new dynamic where everyone can kind of speak with each other. And so there's this ideation process that's happening that is so rich that you just can't get with just downward communication. So I know that was a mouthful, but I'm just loving this conversation. And then just, there's so much to share, so much.
Me too. I feel like this could have been the entire conversation. I feel like there's so much here that we can really delve into, but such good points on the personalization and the segmentation and how we can leverage AI tools to actually better meet our various employee pockets where they are and to tailor comms for them specifically so that they feel more engaged, more heard, they're more willing to communicate honestly and provide that valuable feedback. So I love all the chatter there. And I would just like to hear from both of your perspectives. So both AI enthusiasts who understand the power that it has in promoting greater comms. How would you, or how have you, I suppose, introduced AI into your organization to improve communication? So how has that rollout been? Have you started? What does it look like? Thomas, take us away.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. I will say that I think it's really important, one, to identify what are some of the cross-functional teams that you need to bring into the loop when introducing AI. So really looking at bringing in your legal team, your IT team, your operations team, and really doing some risk mitigation when it comes to introducing AI. I would also say assessing what are the current capabilities that we offer, including any kind of like current technology infrastructure. And then again, conducting a risk assessment. So especially with like data privacy, regulatory compliance. And then lastly, when you're implementing AI, again, kind of going back to that plant analogy, making sure that you're doing it slow and steady. So I would not overwater the plant with so many AI tools that one thing cannot stick. I would stick to one, really perfect it, make it strong. And then once it's self-sufficient, then introduce the next AI tool.
Yeah, great point. So use case basis, very specific, very targeted at first, and then perhaps the opportunity to broaden. Mandy, what about yourself in introducing AI into your organization?
We have, our IT team is really on top of this. We have, I think I mentioned, we have our own proprietary GPT tool, and we have to ease people into it because they're always going to be, you've got your early adopters, you've got kind of like the majority of the people, and then the laggards. I mean, Thomas and I both come from retail. It's the same thing with fashion. Like there are people who are going to adopt it early, the majority, and then the laggards, and you have to accommodate all of them. So for us, with any communication, you introduce it, you repeat it, You show it on different platforms, you repeat it, you give tutorials, you repeat it. Like, there is a bit of a theme to this, like there would be with any communications campaign. But I would say for us, the biggest learning has been education around prompts specifically. So if your team is going to go all in on one, maybe two AI tools, you need to teach people how to use it. It's not enough to give them a website. You need to show them time and time again, sometimes with a little bit of hand holding, particularly for the laggards, what to do with it. And for us, that was and continues to be education around prompts. And I will say too, like, you know, we talked about AI enthusiasts, and then with the laggards, there are people who, once they see how incredible this tool is, they will buy in, they will be excited, but there is good reason for their caution and for their hesitancy, which I think has a lot to do with living in this age of misinformation. I think it's harder than ever to trust that what you're seeing is true and that what you're seeing is, you know, fact checked. And for my team, as we start to lean more and more on AI, we still need to do some of the heavy lifting in terms of having a human being do the proofreading, having a human being do, you know, the context setting to make sure that whatever's being shared is true.
Yeah. Really great points there as well. We are in agreement where I think AI can help to get us 70% of the way there, and it's just supplementary to the work that our employees do or that we do ourselves. It's not a replacement. It's just helping to gather more insights or move us closer, further down the field, but it's never going to fully replace what we're capable of as humans. So thank you for that. And we are arriving at our last question. So I think this has just been such a fruitful conversation. So I hope everyone on the line is having as much fun as we are discussing these important topics. So I will just wrap it up with hearing from you both on what would a contemporary communication strategy look like for you for 2024 and beyond that leverages technology and AI. So if we're wrapping up all of this and we know that employee engagement is huge and that trackability is huge and that showing data and building benchmarks and really supporting our workforce is our ultimate goal, how are we building out a strategy that leverages tech and AI to hit our goals? And Mandy, why don't you close us off with this?
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think for me, my brain is split between, like, practically speaking, what do I think it's going to look like, and then philosophically. So maybe I'll start with the philosophical piece. So I've mentioned on this call this concept of dating. Like, you're dating the tools, you're trying them out. Things are changing quickly. And so I think having what I call a flexible mindset is so important right now in this moment. So dedicating time and, you know, team resources to staying on top of the tools and staying on top of the trends as the technology evolves. So philosophically speaking, I think the flexible mindset is really important, as is bringing it back to the top, full circle, getting really clear on your objectives and not chasing, as I said, those shiny objects. You figure out, what are you trying to achieve? You decide what you're trying to solve first, and then you find the technology and the tools that are going to meet your needs. So philosophically, I think it's the flexible mindset, and I think it's don't chase shiny objects, get really clear on your objectives. And then more practically speaking, when I think about a contemporary communication strategy, I think about using technology to create more inclusive experiences, whether that be at employee events like town halls or webinars. There are ways to lean on technology to create more inclusivity. I also think you can use data to determine the best strategies on an ongoing basis. So like we said earlier, making sure you're doing it consistently. And then the third thing, I think practically speaking, you can use AI to create more personalized and more collaborative, more of a collaborative spirit, I should say, among teams. So sort of philosophically and then more practically speaking, that's what I'm foreseeing as a more contemporary communication strategy for 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, I love that dual thought process and way of approaching it. I couldn't agree more with that. So thank you, Mandy. And Thomas, how are you planning to leverage tech and AI in your future communication strategy?
Yeah, I will preface by saying that I probably am using more of the philosophical mindset, kind of piggybacking on what Mandy is saying here. There are 4 areas in which I think there's some really huge opportunity for us. One of the things, and again, I have an aversion to this, Grace, as you mentioned, with the fake things, like I totally get it. But there is a tool out there that creates AI-generated avatars and voiceovers. And so one of the things that we're trying to think through is how do we communicate in a non-traditional way that's not just in written form? And how can we be inclusive in that way where we're creating communication that's very multidimensional and not just two-dimensional, right? So that's one of the things. And so as we're trying to drive home messages after a town hall, for example, what are the avatars and voiceovers that we're using? Speaking to the Microsoft Suite opportunity, really leveraging automatic transcription and captioning of meetings, I think is going to be really important. Echoing what Mandy said earlier, it's working smarter and not harder, being able to synthesize what are the key themes that are here, and more so, especially with the follow-up communication, rather than having to transcribe everything manually, it does all of the work for you. There's something cool called Otter.ai that summarizes conversations, and it helps identify key points that were discussed during the meeting. And even if as a communications professional, I'm meeting with someone in a different vertical in the technology team, I can record our meeting. It synthesizes all of the key takeaways from the call. And rather than me looking in my notebook or transcribing, I can immediately send them minutes from our meeting, specifically with call to actions. So if they're responsible for some kind of follow-up or something that I need from them, it just makes life very simple. The last thing I would offer is there's a platform called Texio. And so it's very inclusive with language. So it helps you look at the language that you're using, making sure that it's gender inclusive, as well as just in general, from a linguistic standpoint in language, making sure that you're being inclusive. And so you can clearly see I'm a little biased through the lens of DEI, of using AI in a way that's very inclusive and bringing more people along the way that otherwise would not necessarily have access.
Yeah, this has been a gatekeeping-free webinar, so I hope that everybody is leaving here with as many tools to look into as I am. So this has been great. Mandy, do you have any closing thoughts before I close it out? I unfortunately don't know that we'll have time to get to all of our audience questions. I've seen a few come through, so I plan to follow up. Hopefully I get a list of the questions and I can reach out directly to you. But Mandy, any closing thoughts? And then Thomas, any closing thoughts from you after that?
Closing thoughts is really more around gratitude to you, Grace, and to Marcus Evans' organization, and then Thomas, of course, my fearless co-partner here, just for having this space and this conversation. I think the more we can be open with each other, the more we're going to be able to learn together. So thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. This was such a great, fun conversation with so much learning. So appreciate you both. Thomas?
Yeah, the thing I would offer is that I think community is really important. And I think we need to continue the conversation beyond just this point. Oftentimes, when I think of the word dialogue versus monologue, the prefix "die" means two. And so we should be having conversation with each other rather than just a monologue with ourselves and in the silos of our own organization. And so even what you just alluded to, Grace, like, let's not gatekeep, like, sharing is caring. And so love to hear from all of you as well, and hit me up on LinkedIn and let's continue the conversation.
Love it. Very well said. Cheers to all of you, and thank you to everybody who has stayed on the line and listened in, and to who's reached out for us. So we will provide some answers to your questions, and thanks again for the wonderful afternoon. And thank you, Marcus Evans. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Thomas, so much for your great insights. Audience, survey will pop out on your screen. It's just for us, for what would you like to learn more in our future webinars. It will take just a second of you, so just spare a minute or two. On behalf of Marcus Evans and ContactMonkey, I would like to thank you all for your time, and we do hope you'll be watching our next webinar. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.